Right, good morning, everyone. Good to see you. And yeah, just a little bit of intro into me. So I've worked in job advertising now for over a decade. Most of that time, I've been working kind of vendor side, so for job boards and in the software space. But for my spins, I did spend 2 years in-house working at IBM on their global job advertising strategy. And actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things I learned across that journey and some of the approaches we took in the conversation today. So we're going to go through a definition of programmatic advertising. I find you either know what it is or some people have no idea, but they're too scared to say. So we're going to try and dumb it down, go through some of those areas. A little bit of a case study about how we approached that at IBM and how we actually got leadership, etc., to buy into that as a new approach. Give some kind of tidbits on how to optimize job adverts to increase conversions. And then finally, a little bit of a talk about return on investment. I do have to mention Veritone today. That's who we're here with. We've got a standout in the hallway where we're doing prizes. We've got people here as well, so come along and say hello. We've recently rebranded, so I'll forgive everyone for not knowing exactly what that brand is. It was only kind of officially launched on the 15th of April. You may well be familiar with Broadbean technology. So Broadbean was acquired by Veritone, which is a data and AI business. So really exciting for everyone at Broadbean. It means we're going to be bringing more AI into our products. And as that relates today, we're going to be talking a lot about the programmatic advertising element of it as well, really bringing us through that journey into finally 2024. So what does programmatic mean? We've got a lot to cover. Actually, as a question, I was thinking about this on the way in. Does anyone know what the word sesquipedalian means? Anyone heard of that? Put a hand up if you have. Nobody. Brilliant, you're going to learn something at least from this presentation today. The irony is not lost on me, but sesquipedalian, or practicing the habit of sesquipedality, is where you use overly complicated words to describe something quite simple. And that's what I think we do with programmatic every single day. So programmatic is actually just the use of machines to buy on your behalf. I try when I'm explaining it to people to break it into kind of two areas, and I'm going to try and specifically make it relevant to recruitment today. So I split it into active and into passive. And when I'm talking about passive, I'm not necessarily talking about sourcing candidates on a CV database. What I'm talking about is candidates that maybe aren't ready to join your business today, but could be ready in 6 to 12 months' time. So you're kind of getting them ready. And I think when most of us think about programmatic advertising, that passive side is what comes out. We are bombarded by it every single day. And it's that thing where you log into your Facebook or your Instagram feed and suddenly you find yourself looking at new coats that you didn't know that you needed, and you buy a brand new coat. I'm thinking of that at the moment because it's really cold at the moment for April. But it's that kind of area where you're buying something or it's engaging you into a customer. Now, when I was looking at this internally, I think that's where we wanted to be. We wanted to be in a position where when candidates were thinking, do you know what? I need a new job, IBM was the name that came straight onto their lips. But when we actually looked into what do you need to be able to do or what do you need to know to be able to do that, the list became quite long. So it could be anything from having a prioritized list of roles, persona mapping, like you need to know really what you're targeting, even things like accurate forecasting, so knowing what jobs are coming in 6 to 12 months. And when I was in-house, if I knew what was coming in 6 to 12 days, I was pretty happy with that, right? So that was some of the challenges we have, even getting kind of the content. And the other big thing is patience. You can start something today. Is a hiring manager going to be willing to accept that they're not going to see any kind of return on that for 120 and 180 days? So there were some challenges there. And then we thought, well, what about if we were targeting active candidates who are applying for a job today? What do we need them programmatically? The answer was you need a job advert. And that felt like a bit of an easier place to start, right? It was a case of walking before you try and run. And it wasn't we're never going to get to that stage, but maybe it should be a journey, and we should start on that active side where there was a lower barrier for entry. And as we got more and more comfortable, we could move that way down to the passive side. So let's talk a little bit more about what do I actually mean here. And I don't want to patronize anyone today. I'm going to go over some simple things, but hopefully by getting that foundation in place, it's going to make everything I'm talking about a lot clearer. So over the course of time that I've worked in job advertising, there's kind of really been three main ways that people advertise jobs. So you've got your credit or your duration based. That's your reads, your total jobs, your CV libraries, where you put a job on for 4 to 6 weeks. Slots, I think everyone's familiar with that through LinkedIn these days. Irish Jobs. There's some job boards that work in that kind of manner as well. And what's great about those two methods is once you put that job advert up, if you get one candidate or you get 1,000, you pay the same, right? So you can get some really good kind of returns from that. And then this little known job board called Indeed entered the market. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of them, but they moved in and disrupted the industry with their pay-per-performance model of operating. So programmatic job advertising is kind of the evolution of that. When we've been working with customers over the last decade or so, that's really these three of what we're focused on. And this is kind of the next step. So I said about programmatic being an overly complicated word. Actually, when I was describing it, it's so that pay-per-performance, paying for outcomes like you do with channels like Indeed, it's better to look at it at pay-per-performance at scale. So what you're doing is rather than put a £10,000 budget, for example, putting all your eggs in an Indeed-shaped basket in that scenario, actually what you're doing is you're letting AI decide, is Indeed the best channel? Or could I get a better quality candidate for cheaper elsewhere? There are literally thousands of these pay-per-performance channels across the UK, across the world. Even boards like your Reed, your CV libraries, etc., are now accepting some of this in terms of the way that they work. So it's about casting your net a little bit wider and letting that decision-making happen purely based. There's no human element of it. There's no bias. It's going out and purely looking at what's the best cost per applicant I can go out and get. So we'll do this is a little bit of a show of hands. We wanted to we did some great study on this with Aptitude, where we were talking through the different kind of levels and where you might sit. So I'm going to break this into three areas, but if we start stage zero. So in terms of manual, how many people in the room today would you say your posting process right now is kind of purely manual? You're manually going and doing it with job boards. Put your hands up. Cool, so we got some of the people in the room today. I'm gonna put stage 1 and 2 together, so maybe you're doing some automation or you work with like an advertising agency, you do those elements. Put your hands up if you fall in that bracket, 1, 2. Cool, and we're seeing generally that was kind of about 50% of the audience base. And then finally, who is using programmatic today and who's got kind of full automation across that? Congratulations, we got a couple people in the room there. Perfect. So when I was looking at this journey, I would say we're in probably around stage 2, like we were doing a bit of bits and pieces and we were working with an advertising agency. So that time that I'm talking about IBM, when we looked at implementing this and growing the way that we work. So as you can imagine, we was working at some quite large scale. We're talking 60,000+ hires a year, 4.2 million applications was what we was looking at. And the in that I got to change the business might not be the in that you expected. Actually, our hiring demand massively decreased. We were working in tech. This was kind of 2022 going into 2023. So why was that what I was looking for? Well, we felt some pain. And why we felt some pain was we were pretty much focused on purely like traditional job advertising at the time. And it meant that actually I didn't have the jobs to fill the credits in the contracts that we had in place. And that can be really painful. I'm sure people in this room have experienced it. You try and negotiate rollovers, all this type of stuff all across the world. We probably wrote off hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of inventory that we just simply couldn't use. So we were able to go and say to the business, we should change the approach so we don't find ourselves in this situation moving forwards. We need to move to a more agile approach to job advertising. Now that worked really well because everything at IBM is based on agile methodology, agile approach. So I was kind of using the same language that we were using. So what do I mean agile and what were some of the things that we were talking about? First and foremost, when you work on pay-per-performance type models, what's great about it is you can allocate budget, but it's only spent at the moment you spend it, if that makes sense. So if at any point you need to pause a campaign, you hit pause, you get the money back that hasn't already been invested in it. So it meant that in those scenarios, if hiring demand fell off a cliff, we had that flexibility, we could pull the budget back and do it in something else. It wasn't going to be stuck and stay invested in those areas. Also agile in the sense that it gave us a bit more of a bird's eye view and the ability to go and actually tackle what was a problem for the company. So what I mean by that is, if in January we were looking at developers in the US and that switched, and in April the priorities was hiring customer service people in India, it didn't really matter. We could just route the budget and the priority wherever we wanted to do because these job boards work all over the world. So it gave us that kind of great flexibility that we were looking for. And then these are the kind of some of the language that I was using to senior leadership. They don't really understand some of these elements, right? So I was saying to them, for candidates, it's just like turning on the tap. You turn the tap on when you want more candidates, you put budget in, and when you're done, you turn it off. And actually, I saw at the beginning some of people's issues today is actually having too many applications, and that was something that actually I had some problems with in certain markets. So for us, turning off the tap was arguably just as important as turning it on, because we might have been able to say, look, actually, once we get to 50 applications, we know we're at a kind of a process where we're getting kind of diminishing returns from there on in. Our recruiters are just spending a lot of time wasted that they're looking through CVs. So if we could pull that back, not only would we save time, but we could spread our budget across more jobs to get more candidates for the jobs that actually we need additional support on. So all of these things help the business to actually decide, you know what, this was the right decision and something we're going to go on. And that's what I'm kind of here to say as well. I think with all of these things, nowadays, everything, you have to be one side of the fence or the other. Really, like our approach as well at Veritone, we are completely agnostic on where the candidates have come from. We think some job boards deliver great value. But you should be looking at what the data is telling you and where it makes sense, moving from kind of that traditional approach where you're reliant on the candidates to come through to say, actually, we want to be more proactive. We want to actually decide what good looks for us. You can be much more strategic. At that level, bringing the performance basis makes a big difference. So now hopefully you understand a little bit about programmatic. I'm going to do some bits on optimizing your jobs for advertising. I did a lot of content on this again, and I had to do internal training on IBM. IBM has about 2,000 recruiters, so this can't really be like a white glove service. But what it meant was I was able to put in guidelines, and hopefully that means for everyone here today, everything that I'm showing should apply to you in the room. So something that I'm quite passionate about, a lot of people do great work on content, how to construct the perfect job advert, and some of that's not my area of expertise. But I think we put too little a focus on this bit here, the awareness. You can have the greatest job advert in the world. If no one ever finds it, it doesn't matter, right? So what are some of the things that I learned when we looked at that? Well, there's two key things here. So first of all, loads of people have done lots of research across millions and millions of jobs. And what they found is 1 to 3 words or 35 characters or less is the optimum length. The reason that that 35 character number is important, once you go beyond that, a candidate can't see the full job title on a mobile phone. So the more you go over, the more diminishing returns you get again, because the candidates don't necessarily know what the full job is, okay? You've got great free tools out there. So I've used Indeed, Hiring Insights, and Google Trends. They're both free, go and log in them. And this is really to make sure that what you call your job title internally, is that what your audience is calling it? Because if they're not, you're not going to appear in search results. So again, anecdote on that. When we was at IBM, we used to hire for about 3,000 people, or we have 3,000 live jobs at any one time, what we called application developers. We learned that the market called those software developers. So it's a very, very subtle change, but by doing that, we were able to generate raw traffic. And it's not just about more traffic, it's the right traffic. It's the audience that we were looking for. That was the search term that they were using. And another area on that where I think programmatic offers so much kind of value to any business is in those jobs that you struggle, you can use it to actually put multiple job titles and multiple locations on it. So let me explain that a bit better. Imagine in this scenario, you were hiring for a sales executive in Bristol, okay? Well, what you can actually do using programmatic is create variants of that job that all go into the parent one. So this means that if a candidate's actually searching for account executive or business development or new business sales, all those job titles, you're still going to capture them. And even better, you can create a catchment area that goes through. We use Google's API to do this. So let's say there was a commuter radius of 30 minutes. All the locations in there can go up so that if an applicant in this scenario is searching business development manager in Winscombe, they're still going to be able to come across that job, and you're going to increase your chances of casting that net a little bit further. Okay, so let's imagine candidates have actually found your job. That's the first thing, okay? Now we've got to try and convert them into something. We've got to try and convert them into an application you can do something with. So this was how I used to always start my training when I was doing this internally. I put 2 adverts up on the screen. Okay, so I want you to read through both of these, just take 30 seconds. There's no tricks, they're for the same exact job. But I want you to just think about, would you be more likely to apply for advert A or advert B? So just have a think about that for a second. Okay, so as a show of hands again, because I've not been clever enough to get this on Slido, I should be more prepared. So we're going to go old school. As a show of hands, how many of you would be more likely to apply for advert A? Interesting. Okay, and what about advert B? Perfect. And there's no right or wrong answers, by the way. It's just about what statistically you're more likely to look at. In pretty much every room I've done this, everyone goes for advert A, okay? So around about 90% tends to be numbers. Now, when I used to do this training, that's what we would see. And then I would say, congratulations, you all want to work at Oracle, okay? Now, the reason I do that is because it does highlight that there is a difference, and this does make an impact to the candidates when they're looking at these jobs. So what are some of the things that meant that maybe you did prefer that one to the other? So again, if you look at really large data sets, both when you look at Textio and Indeed, they've kind of converged on this, looking at 660 words or 1,000 characters. It's about the same thing, but the point is to be concise. Now, I'm not going to touch on all of these in a huge amount of detail. For example, Charles Olio already talked about things like the gender decoder, which I think is great. I've got a free tool in there. But when we're talking about diversity, as I know that was something that come up as the common issue, actually what I'm more passionate about here is this 5 bullet points rule. So I'll tell you a little bit more why that's the case. So generally, when you look across audience bases, so male candidates are likely to apply for jobs if they hit 60% of the criteria. Females, and this is true for underrepresented populations, it tends to be 100%. So the more bullet points you have on requirements, the more chances you are giving for probably the candidates you want the most to rule themselves out before they even apply and you have a chance to speak to them. So that's the first point. The second point is, if you go to a hiring manager and say, what requirements do you need for this job? You're probably going to come back with a list as long as your arm. If you go to them and say, what are the 5 most important things for this position, you're much more likely to get a better list. And you as a recruiter and as a team are much more likely to understand what's actually important for the job. So it plays into all these things. It helps you be concise. It helps you to broaden where you go. And again, if we're talking diversity, you can, one of the biggest movers, put your salary range on there. Salary transparency is something that any candidate cares about, and it's going to get it all the way across the board. Okay, so final thing I just want to talk about is some of the ROI that I would measure, like what are some of the things that I think are important to identify. First of all, get you to be able to compare apples to apples. Second of all, understand perhaps where some of your bottlenecks are in recruiting for candidates. So first one I want to talk about is view to apply start rate. I said apply start, so that doesn't mean that just means that they've clicked apply on an external channel, but they might not have completed and gone into your ATS. So everyone in the room today should be able to get that for any vendor that you're working with. They all track it, okay? Now, the point is different platforms have different numbers. So Indeed, for example, about 8 to 10%, LinkedIn about 14 to 16. Again, so in LinkedIn Talent Insights, you can actually see what your competitors are trending. You see it as kind of an overview, like anonymous. But I was able to go into the business and say we were trending about 2% lower than our competitors. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that makes a massive difference when you're talking the scale that we were looking at. So again, saying our competitors are doing it better is a great way to motivate people that actually we have something here that we need to work towards. Next, apply start to apply complete. How many candidates that are landing on your career site actually go into your ATS? This is going to tell you, is your application process helping or hindering you in terms of converting? So, bit of advice here, I've never seen anyone that's accidentally walked into a great candidate apply process. So you've got to be conscious about it, and generally for most businesses, it's about getting better. There is always kind of a line though, like the right amount of friction. You don't want to make it too easy and you're suddenly overwhelmed with candidates, but you don't want to make it too hard. So it's kind of always one of those that you're balancing out, but being intentional about measuring it, that's the most important part to start with. And then for me, what I really cared about was what I call CPQA, cost per qualified applicant. So for me, I used to look at shortlist, as the proxy for this. You could be interviews, it could be whatever you want. But the point is, I knew once I was taking candidates through to shortlist that actually that source was delivering good quality. We were going to make hires. It was just a matter of time, because there's 1,000 reasons why a candidate might not move to your business. It's nothing to do with how good they were at the beginning or how good a fit they were for the job, right? So the more you can do that, the more you're going to be able to get results. And then final thing I just wanted to talk about was context is key. So when we used to go into some of the meetings, like this was kind of as I was joining, we would say things like this. So one of the things we used to measure was how many clicks and applications did we get towards our career site. So generally, we were looking to grow that number. And if we were growing the number of views to our career site, we were doing good things, right, as a talent marketing function. So we might go into a room though and say something. I've just seen there's a typo. March, it's not March 1,000 years into the future. So let's say that's March 2023. We would go in and we would perhaps say something like, unfortunately, like we're going down slightly year on year. So we've got a little bit less traffic than we did do in the previous year. The thing is, we were missing the context in some of those scenarios. Because actually, maybe if you looked at the total live number of jobs, then you're saying, well, we've got less jobs than we had this time last year, so how are we going to get more visits? When you look at it from that perspective, actually, we were getting more clicks per job, so we were doing better. And then the more senior you go up the chain, they don't really even care for this kind of level. Actually, what they want is a sentence that explains it. So I would say things like, despite a falling hiring demand, we've grown the number of views per job 22% year on year. For their tip boxes ticked, everyone's happy, they leave you to kind of go and do your own things, okay? So it's just about making sure that you're always bringing the right context when you're communicating, and you're kind of selling yourself in the position, right? You're selling the facts and the ways that you're actually helping to make an impact. So hopefully you've taken some value from that. A summary, we've gone through programmatic, we've gone through the case study, optimizing jobs, and some examples. Here's the final thing that I'm saying. For everything, it's a case of moving yourself through that journey. So making sure you're staying relevant, you're trying out some of these methods, but you're using the data to guide you and you're doing it as and when it makes sense. As I said, we are Veritone Hire. So my kind of headline summary there is, however you advertise jobs right now, we think we've got the best-in-class solutions to be able to support there, whether it's job distribution, media buying, programmatic advertising, anything like that, we can help. We've got a stand over at the back. And then finally, to do that, we're offering everyone that works here today the option to do like a complimentary job audit. So if you want to speak to us, we're happy to have some conversations for free, talk to you a bit more about how you're advertising, maybe some of the steps that you want to consider. Thank you very much, everyone.